is that if I'm going to do a calculation, I could just take 4 parenthesis 1 divide 4 parenthesis squared, probably what you're used to doing, minus 2 parenthesis 1 divide 4 parenthesis plus 1. And that would have come up with 0.75. Now, what your calculator has and what we're going to use extensively in chapter 6, I think about which chapter was going to be in, is that these calculators have something called deep recall. Even the little baby calculators have deep recall. But not deep recall, but it has a recall. If you press the up arrow on the little baby ones, this guy. Okay. This will bring back what I last did. And it does, look, it has a little bit of a recall. These are some of the last commands I did on that. And the up arrow brings you through something called, I don't remember what it's called now. It'll come back to me. But anyway, essentially a stack. So it layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. It remembers until it runs out of memory. And then what happens when you do a new calculation, the one that's at the top of the memory falls off, but it still keeps your newest ones. This one has deep recall as well. And since I've put this in here, all I would have to do, and we had to do a second calculation, put in x equal 1. So what I would do is, notice above the enter button, there is something called entry. Now, if I press, and it is blue, if I press second, and when I'm doing a second, it's an up arrow. It's kind of like a shift key on a computer. Entry, it brings back the last calculation that I did. If I continue to do second entry, it will run through all of the last stuff that I did until it runs out of memory. And then as I get to the top of the stack, and you can see this has quite a bit more memory than my little baby one does. But now what can I do is I can go in and I can edit this. And I need a 1. Now, oftentimes what I do is, if I know I'm going to do more than one calculation, 1.0 is the same as 1. It allows me space in the parentheses if I've got to do more calculations, that I can then go in and enter a negative sign if I needed to enter a negative number without having to go in and insert anything. So I'm going to change this guy to 1.0 in the parentheses, and now when I hit that comes out with 3. I can continue to do that if I wanted to say, all right, I want negative 1/2, and that's going to be harder. Negative 2, and I just put a point there to fill in the blank. Negative 2, put a point there to fill in the blank. Press enter, and then I can do the calculation. So I can do second enter, calculate, second enter, change it, calculate. So I could get a series of values that way. Another thing that you can do that is really helpful, and by the way, what's really kind of nice with the memory is that if I were to do second, I enter my data, second enter, second enter, second enter, I can do a linear regression. Why? Because I've done it before. I don't have to type it in again. I just have to find it in the list, and then once I've got my data entered, just press enter, find it, press enter, and it does what I need it to do. Is that I can do it off of a graph, which is really kind of handy. All I have to do is make sure that when I press window and window, all of these things across the top deal with the graphs. And that says x equal allows me to put in my formula. And notice I have my plots turned on, so while I'm there, I'm going to turn it off. And what am I going to enter? I'm going to clear y1, and I'm going to enter my formula. 4x squared minus 2x plus 1. And I'm going to graph that. What I make sure that when I press window, that any value that I may be interested in calculating is within that window. So I can go from minus 10 on the x to 10 on the x. I don't care about y, quite honestly. I just want to make sure that my x's are in the window. But it would be nice to see the graph, wouldn't it? So I'm just going to go minus 10 and 10, which is the standard graphing window. So now I've changed my graph paper from minus 10 to 10 to minus 10 to 10. So that's what my graph paper setting. And when it says x scale, that's what the hash marks are. I don't really care. I just leave well enough alone. And now I just press graph. Now it's going to get a graph of that up, and that was a picture of that thing. Now I want to put in x, get out y, put in x, get out y. Easy thing to do. Press trace. Now what trace does, it puts me physically on the graph proper, like a bug on the graph, and he can walk along using the left arrow and the right arrow. He walks along the graph. And those are actually x and y coordinate points on that graph. Well, what do I want to calculate out? 1/4. Once I hit trace, I just type 1 divide 4. Notice there's no y value over here. When I press enter, it will give me the y value with that x value. And then the next one I did was 1. As long as I don't do anything, it gives me the y value with that x value. I can press negative 0.3. I don't care, right? Press enter. That gives me the y value with that x value. So what it's doing is it's putting in x and it's getting out y. That saves you an immense amount of time in terms of calculation. Immense amount of time in terms of calculation. Just make sure that the x values are there. Doesn't matter whether or not the y values are, because I could put in now x equal 10. I'm now off my graph paper, and you notice that it gave me a y value. Yeah, because the x's were on the graph paper. However, if I were to put in 12, notice it won't. Why? Because I'm now off my graph paper. It can't calculate unless the graph is within the window. So if I press go to, it sends it back. Well, that was a 12 now. Yeah, if I wanted a 12, I need to increase my x's. I just make sure whatever x values I want to calculate. And I can set up a T-bar chart that way. Put all my x's in, put my graph in, making sure that my x's are in the window, right? And then just go in and put in x, get out y, put in x, get out y. You can fill in your T-bar chart that way. Cool. Saves you an immense amount of time. You use the calculator for what it's best doing, calculations. Calculations. That's what you want to use your calculator for. Okay. Any questions? So now we have finished a section. We'll finish everything else tomorrow. The review is up, by the way. And so at that point,